And they decided they will partner with us. So 2019, we then start building 6060. Needless to say, we only had 2 engineers when we actually partnered with ShopRite. They thought we had many engineers, but we actually only had 2. They trusted in this small startup, and it took us about 9 to 12 months to build 6060. And 2020 just came along. Within, perhaps we had only gone live for 2 or 3 months.
Wow.
And it was 2020 and COVID.
Opportunity meets preparation.
Absolutely. You couldn't say that again. It was, we were just on time. We just had the right technology, the right experience. You know? And we were able to turn that opportunity and actually monetize on it. And that relationship has been great. We still support the 6060 platform. It has grown into a significant business for ShopRite.
Yeah. We got it next. That's how you finesse. We come for they next. We come to collect. Did it all on my own, yeah. When it brought it back home, yeah. Now they calling my phone, yeah. But I'm all in my zone. They not a threat. Tell them reset. When they're at their best, we still not impressed. Did it all on my own, yeah. When it brought it back home, yeah. Bought a watch with the stones, yeah.
Right before we start, we want to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by Chapter. Chapter ensures that your online business never sleeps. We started Chapter when you realize that businesses use social media to talk to their customers and they end up losing up to 40% of their sales due to abandoned carts. This happens when a customer DMs you on Instagram, a customer sends you a message on WhatsApp, and you're not able to respond within 7 minutes. This then leads the customer to look for another business to look for that particular good or service that you're offering. With Chapter, you can be able to elevate the customer experience by running AI agents that can be able to respond to customers in less than 30 seconds on both Instagram and WhatsApp. If you want to make sure your business never sleeps, if you want to make sure that you can increase the revenue you're able to make by up to 5x, just visit www.chapter.co and we'll be able to help you. So that's Chapter without an A, so chpter.co, and we'll be able to turn your business into a business that will thrive in the AI future.
Hello, champions. Welcome back to another episode of your favorite entrepreneurship podcast. And today we have an amazing guest, Mr. Tinyiko. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Thanks, Tash.
Yes, and we're going to be talking about venture building in Africa as usual. And he's one of Africa's movers and shakers in this new age. So Tinyiko is an experienced tech entrepreneur who co-founded several tech and telecom businesses in South Africa and in Ghana, so South and West. He's also the CEO and founder of Mavoni Fiber, a fiber-to-the-home operator covering over 10,000 homes in South Africa's underserved townships. And there they deal with making sure these homes are connected to the internet. And from an investor side, he's a partner at Chanzo Capital, which is a VC fund that is focused on funding early stage and scale-up technology businesses across Africa. And last but not least, he's the co-founder of a brand you might know called Zulzi, which is an e-commerce startup that pioneered on-demand delivery in South Africa. So Zulzi is used by over 200,000 customers for quick commerce grocery shopping and has partnered with the largest grocery retailer in Africa, that's ShopRite, to deliver its 6060 e-commerce platform. So it's really good to have you, and I can't wait to hear about these transitions, all these different businesses, and where you get so much time to manage these businesses. But let's start by just hearing about who you are as a person, even outside business.
Yeah, thanks, Tash. Thanks for this invite. Tash and I were hanging out in Nairobi 2 weeks back, and last week we were in Cape Town. So it's exciting to be here in Joburg and talking about tech businesses. Just in summary, so Tinyiko Valoyi, I'm a South African. Grew up in the north of South Africa, a province called Limpopo, a small town called Giani. I have a family, a wife, and 2 beautiful kids. I'm expecting a 3rd one soon.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, and I have been in terms of my profession. I'm a software engineer. Worked in the engineering space for many years for various tech businesses, software companies, banks, healthcare companies here in South Africa. I've had also a chance to work in Europe and the US as well before venturing out on my own.
Okay.
Other than that, I'm an avid reader. I'm a very social person, very passionate about Africa and its development. And I've been in business now going for 10 to 13 years.
Interesting. So, throughout your life business journey, what is one quote that's really inspired you that you live by?
Yeah, I don't know how long ago, but I remember watching Steve Jobs during one of his commencement speech, and as he was talking to the new graduates, I think it was Stanford University, and he said the words "stay hungry, stay foolish." I'm sure many of you will be very familiar with these words. They just kind of resonated a lot with me. They almost seemed to describe a little bit of how I'd always approached going into business, how I'd approached life in general. During my days as a software engineer, I learned a lot from that quote. So I live by that quote. It is one quote that I encourage many founders to actually heed quite seriously.
Stay hungry.
Stay foolish.
Stay foolish.
It just says a lot in it, you know.
Yes.
And I think as we talk further, you'll see why it's such a motivating quote, and why I've spent a lot of time following it.
Yeah. So you came from a software engineering background. How was your journey into finding out that you were an entrepreneur and you wanted to build business?
Yeah, so actually the first bite I had, I was still at university. So I studied at University of Cape Town.
Yeah.
These were early days. There was a new platform at the time called Java, which many of us today will take for granted, which has had a tremendous impact in terms of how the internet and web applications are built.
Yeah.
In those early days, I sort of became an evangelist for Java on campus. I actually lobbied the head of department of computer science at UCT to introduce this as a language of learning on campus. I didn't succeed very much at that time, but I did actually succeed in convincing many other students to adopt and start learning Java
and programming.
Yeah, programming pretty much. And I then attempted to start several businesses, all of which failed while I was on campus. In fact, I had decided that I was not going to work for anyone at that time. I'd already decided I was going to start a tech business out of campus. I convinced a few classmates that we could do various things. So my very first business was called Objective Logic. At that time, I clearly, while I was quite tech savvy, I didn't know much about business. So needless to say that didn't really work very well. But that was my first bite at trying to go into business.
So what was Objective Logic about?
At the time, we wanted to build an integrated development tool for software engineers who would largely be working in Java and other similar languages. It was going to be a collaborative integrated dev environment where, engineers could collaborate with one another. Maybe we were a little bit too early because we were already thinking about AI type of collaboration where, young engineers could get assistance from a remote engineer, perhaps across the Atlantic, and they could collaborate on projects. So very technical in its nature. Also it was going to be quite challenging to build such a tool because when you remember, these are early 2000s, mid 2000s, the internet speeds were not so great.
Yeah, it was very early.
To build that kind of a tool, you needed really great internet speeds to ensure that the collaboration could be seamless.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And now you get out of campus. You decided you're not getting a job. So how are you surviving at this time?
So while on campus, I started, dabbling in various things. So I remember getting a part-time job at what was like an online casino. So this casino was interesting because it was based out of Canada.
Yeah.
But it had it basically was offshore and operations running out of Cape Town.
Okay.
So I get a job there working pretty much like as an operations guy. So nothing technical about this job. Other than it gives me a view into, online gambling and how bad it could be. I remember at some stage we would be, some of our tasks was consoling some of the customers who had lost millions of dollars, gambling on this online casino. You know. The gaming servers were developed by a company out of South Africa, Durban actually.
Okay.
So it was quite fascinating for me to understand that whole process of building gaming, servers that people could play on online, and how all these customers, most of them based in the US and Europe, were actually gambling their life savings here. Yeah. So this job I used to do at night, actually. It was kind of like a 12 midnight to 7 a.m. job, very stressful, but it kept me alive. And then I started looking for a real job. My sister had moved to Cape Town to study as well, and I now was responsible for another adult, and that quickly gave me a wake-up call.
So you decided you're not getting a job, but things got tough.
Things got tough. I clearly couldn't survive, trying my small business.
Yeah.
I had to get a real job, and I end up getting employed by a very interesting company that I'll tell you more about, Mosaic Software.
Yeah.
And I actually become one of about 8 engineers building a payment gateway platform at the time, called Postillion. And this was very groundbreaking and it was very exciting. So I joined this team. Yeah. And this team is building in Java, which was a language that I understood pretty well.
Yeah. Interesting. How does that how does the journey evolve into you ending up in entrepreneurship?
So when I get this job as a Java software engineer, this is a small company, an entrepreneurial company that was building groundbreaking payments platforms.
Yeah.
I then get exposed to building a software product, which was being sold to banks all around the world.
Okay.
So you really get to understand how products are developed, how a small business become a global business. It basically allowed me to travel quite a bit. I traveled to the Netherlands where I was, implementing this platform for various banks. I traveled to the UK. Because the company was quite small, you tend to be involved in various areas, in product development, in software engineering. You also see the sales cycle. So that was kind of the early days that really got me to start thinking entrepreneurship quite seriously. But it was to take another 4 or 5 years before I eventually took the leap.
Okay.
So I left Mosaic.
So 5 years, you worked in this business for 5 years?
Yeah, I worked in this business for 5 years. This was based in Cape Town.
Was it growing?
It was growing rapidly. It was growing very rapidly. In fact, when I started working there, it had an engineering team of about 8-9 people. Within 5 years, it had grown to close to 100 engineers.
Wow.
With 4 or 5 offices. Nice. Had an office in Fort Lauderdale in the US, London, Singapore, and Australia.
Nice.
And the Postillion product itself sort of became like a big, Visa, MasterCard processing platform, and it allowed small and regional banks and big telcos to integrate with credit card and debit card processors.
So this is the first wave of fintech, basically.
It was the first wave of fintech. If for those of us who know the likes of InterSwitch, they were running. They actually were one of the early customers of Postilion. And many of the banks here in South Africa still to this day use Postilion.
Okay.
It had gone on to be acquired by major, ATM and banking vendors. But it was really the first wave of fintech.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So this must have been an exciting experience at the time.
Yeah.
So 5 years later, what makes you confident enough to take the leap? What do you see?
So I moved to Johannesburg. In fact, after working a little bit in the UK for Mosaic Software, I then decide I want to really take a jab at this entrepreneurship journey, and I come back to South Africa, and I decide that Johannesburg is where it all will start.
Yeah.
I didn't jump straight into entrepreneurship. I did work for an investment bank here, Rand Merchant Bank as a CTO, which exposed me quite a bit onto the enterprise side of things.
Okay.
And building internet banking platforms and so forth. The workflow.
This was a very big bank.
Yeah, Rand Merchant Bank was quite big. It's one of the leading investment banks here, alongside Investec. So it was quite great to work for them in those early days. Because I had been on the payment side of things with Postilion, we were a little bit ahead of the curve, so we could bring some of the best practices into the bank, because when you work for a software house, the quality standards are much higher there, because you are building for a global market, a global audience.
Yeah.
So spent a year or two at RMB, and I then ran into a very interesting founder who I'll talk a little bit about, who actually back in 2005-06 actually was the first business that really brought high-speed broadband into South Africa.
Yeah.
At that time, many people only experienced internet through dial-up and the early versions of ADSL. And this company, this founder had started a company called Wireless Business Solutions. Here in South Africa, they traded as iBest. This is actually today known as Rain. The business has subsequently been acquired and rebranded as Rain. So many listeners may know Rain in South Africa. It's one of the larger 4G, 5G operators. When I ran into this founder, he says to me, "Oh, who do you work for?" So I say, "Oh, no, I'm an engineer. I work for the investment bank, RMB." And he says to me, "Oh, interesting. I'm an engineer too, but I'm about to start a wireless broadband network, which will launch in a few weeks. I'll give you my business card. Have a look at it. It may be very interesting." I didn't really take it very seriously. But needless to say, a few weeks later, I ran into him at one of the big shopping centers, and he was actually launching iBest.
Yes.
And he then convinced me to leave the bank and actually join iBest.
Okay.
This was completely different because this was a telco play. This is a mobile broadband network.
And this is something you haven't done before.
I had not done this before. In fact, the only exposure I had was while at Mosaic Software, we had deployed Postilion at Vodafone in the UK. And it helped them with pay-as-you-go. So people who would be able to buy their pay-as-you-go units over the ATM or point of sale. So that was my only exposure to telecoms. It was actually helping the telcos to process payments using the Postilion platform. But I'd never really worked at an ISP or a telco before then.
So, and this is a question many ask is, how do I attract a co-founder, or how do I find my first team members, my first hires. So first, in what capacity was this guy inviting you to join him? And second is, what convinced you? What made you take a bet on this guy? Because I'm assuming you were like among the first people to work with him. Yeah.
So this was a very charismatic, founder. He had worked in the US, had studied in the US. He really believed that things could be done better in South Africa. So he had a lot of conviction around actually transforming connectivity in South Africa. And when I sat down with him, I realized it was still a small business, but they actually did have a network that they had built. At the time, it was covering some portions of the Johannesburg Metro. And he invited me to join him initially more like as a consultant. So it wasn't really a full-time job. It was kind of like a part-time consultant. But what made him realize I could do more? So he gives me one of these wireless modems.
Yes.
This is back in 2005-06. At that time, nobody had internet at home.
I mean, that's the small thing you could plug onto your laptop.
Plug onto your laptop, and even the new 5G home routers that we're all familiar with now.
Yeah.
So he had something like that. Okay. So he gives me 2 of these units, and he says, "Go try it." I get home and voila, I have internet at home.
Wow.
And
So
I've never had internet at home at this stage. I only could get internet from work or from an internet cafe, and it was very slow. So I plugged this thing and it actually worked.
Yeah.
So I now move around with my laptop. I go to work. I'm connected. At this stage, I'm still working for the investment bank for RMB. And everybody wonders, who's this cool kid with a dongle that he can plug on his laptop? And he has internet everywhere.
Yeah.
I then take one of the other modems. I give it to my younger brother, Donald, who is the founder of Zulzi. And I'll talk a little bit about how that had an impact in him becoming a tech founder himself. I take it to him. He lives on campus. He's studying at Wits University here. And he becomes the cool kid with internet in his room. And nobody else has internet.
And this is for free now. Like this guy
free.
just gave
just gave it to me. It's free.
Wow.
I'm not paying for it. He just says, you go try it and let's talk. So I'm blown away with this whole thing, I mean, this is clearly going to be so transformational to internet. And in a few weeks, I managed to convince the procurement people in the bank and the CIO that we needed the bank to use this. So I think after doing that, after convincing procurement people, they placed an order for 300 of these. So Tommy...
Can you remember how much you guys were paying for each?
It was expensive. It must have been at least $100 or more at the time,
For
each subscription.
Modem.
And this, as a monthly subscription.
Monthly, $100 each.
It was quite expensive.
Wow.
But because of...
So this is like $30,000 a month in revenue.
It was
for
a
this
big,
business.
it was a very big business. I didn't realize at the time that I had just clinched one of the first big corporate clients for this business. And Tommy, may his soul rest in peace, was very, very impressed with what I had done. And at that moment, I think he then decided this young man was going to join me and help us grow the iBest brand outside of South Africa. And so that's how I get involved with that's my first involvement in telecommunication.
Okay, so you join him. The story is getting interesting. What happens?
So I join him. As I join him, we look at the South African business. So initially, he thought I could help them grow the corporate customer base. I could help with looking for alternative, services around this connectivity network.
Yeah.
So we looked at things like voice over IP. Could we actually overlay voice over internet on this network, you know?
Yeah.
And then he also asks me to look at new markets outside of South Africa. And there were a few proposals that started coming in, you know. So many markets in West Africa, East Africa had heard about the success of iBest here.
Yeah.
The network was growing quite fast. It actually shot up and possibly became the second largest, you know, broadband provider after the fixed, you know, network that's owned by Telkom.
Wow.
And it just grew from 5,000 subscribers. A few months it was 10,000. A few months it was 20,000.
Yeah.
So I then basically started looking at Ghana.
Yeah.
We'd met a few people, you know, that had managed to secure licenses, spectrum licenses there.
Yeah.
And he then gives me a task. Pack your bags, go to Accra, go to Ghana, and go set up iBest. And I must admit, I didn't even know exactly where Ghana was on the map. I knew it was somewhere in the West Coast. Yeah. But I agree. I literally pack my bags, and I get on a plane, and you know, in a few weeks from the time I joined him, I was actually
You're setting
in
up
Accra.
a new office.
I was setting up a new business in Accra. you
Yeah.
know.
Did that pan out well? Was it a good decision?
Yeah, it was an interesting decision. In fact, you'll see as we talk through that actually there's a lot of good and a lot of bad that happens, and it all adds up to the lessons that you learn as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I get to Ghana and I'm under the impression that, you know, iBest has got a big budget. We're gonna roll out real quick, but in fact, what Tammy had not told me at the time was that he was the local business in South Africa, which by now had additional shareholders.
Yes.
You know, both institutional and other individual shareholders. We're not actually going to be part of our expeditions in West Africa. So it was actually a completely separate business. And he was funding it out of his own pocket.
Okay. So he'd seen the opportunity in Ghana and decided, okay, let me
go for it. Yeah. I think partly he was worried that his other shareholders here would slow him down, perhaps did not have the appetite to take risks in that market.
Okay.
So I think that's part of the reason why I decided to go it alone.
Yeah.
And I became his point man.
Yeah.
And so I arrived in Ghana thinking that, we've got a blank
Market.
check.
Yeah.
You know, but it quickly became apparent to me that we didn't have the backing of the local business. We had to build this from scratch, completely independent, build our own systems, build everything from scratch, and actually raise our own capital to roll it out.
Okay. What was the eventuality of this business in Ghana?
So it was a very, very tough experience. You know, it brings me back to my motto of stay hungry, stay foolish.
Yes.
It was one of the most foolish decisions I made because I had no clue how tough the operating environment was. I didn't know we didn't have the requisite capital to roll out, and that we didn't actually have the backing of the local, you know, business. Yeah. So I arrived there, in fact, to a queue of people that we owed money. So the business had already, so the founders who secured the license had incurred a lot of expenses when I arrived. So the French guys with the local partner had secured the initial license, spectrum license from the regulator. And they had incurred some costs that they did not disclose to us prior to actually, you know, agreeing to take over the license.
Yeah.
And when I arrived, I actually discovered that we owed the landlord for the villa where I was going to stay. We owed the landlord for the office. We owed the, you know, Ghana electricity utility.
So you were firefighting.
It was fire from day one.
But
it was too late for me. I could not come back. So I decided I'm staying and I'm going to battle this out.
Yes.
That whole process took us 2.5 years. With a couple of court cases, there were some disputes with the local shareholder who was involved in securing the license.
Yeah.
And that had to go through the high courts in Ghana. Took a very long time. You know.
So you've left a high-paying, high-flying job in Johannesburg, and that's what you mean. It was the most stupid decision.
Yeah, I'd left a really good job as an IT executive.
Yeah.
In Johannesburg, and I had landed in Accra. With many problems that I didn't foresee. In fact, it didn't take long. In 4 or 5 months, there wasn't even enough money to actually pay my own salary and pay my own villa, where I stayed.
Were you a partner in that business, or you're just working for him at that point?
At that point, I was actually just working for the business. So I was just a country director.
Yeah.
I didn't have any shareholding in the business, but there was an understanding that I was to subsequently get some shareholding in the business as a founding partner. Although I was not investing my own cash, so it was more going to come in the form of sweat equity.
And so you keep grinding, and this business doesn't work out. So you come back.
So interestingly, I stayed the course.
Yeah.
We ran this very tight for 2 years with no money, pretty much, and with a very tiny network. We had a small network just covering a subsection of the metropolitan area.
Yeah.
It was so small that we could only provide service to around 400 or so customers.
Okay.
And we were not breaking it. We were losing money all the time.
Yeah.
We had then approached the DFIs here in South Africa to raise funding for this new business, which we called iBest Africa.
Okay.
Unbeknown to us, that process was to take 2 to 3 years to conclude.
Yeah.
We thought the moment we pitched to the banks, we had the requisite experience from the South African business. The founder clearly had a track record. We had a proven technology. We had a proven, market and all of that. And we already had something going. We thought it would be quite quick to raise the funding. It turned out that it was going to take us a very long time.
Yeah.
In the meantime, what happened is I decided to stay put. I had a very tiny team, 10 people or so in Ghana. And we basically held the fort and kept firefighting on all fronts.
Yes.
It was quite tough because I lost my villa. At some point I stayed in the basement of our office.
What?
Yeah. And this office we were owing 10 months of rent. And the landlord stayed on the top floor of this office, and I had the misfortune of seeing him every day. I come to office, and he would signal to me that you owe me money. When are you paying me?
And he'll tell him. And
you would keep promising him, things will work out. Things will work out. Yeah. So it was very, very interesting. But it is. I value the experience because it really is. It is pretty much the journey of an entrepreneur. So I kind of saw it firsthand.
Yeah.
There were other big challenges in Ghana at the time. Lots of load shedding, power cuts. So it was very difficult to run a network with no power. We didn't have enough capital to put up backup power.
Yeah.
But the market was clearly there.
Yeah.
There was no doubt that we had a great opportunity.
Yeah.
And that it was going to eventually succeed.
Yeah. And obviously you're running Mavoni now, which is a very similar business. Did you start when immediately you came back, or at what point did you decide I wanted to do this and focus on townships? What was that?
Yeah. So I then in 2008.
Yeah.
We have a breakthrough. We are able to raise a large sum of money, close to $30 million for iBest Africa.
Yeah.
By this time, the business plan had expanded. It was going to cover 5 other countries.
Wow.
And it was all on the back of what we had built in Ghana, despite how small it was. So I spent a lot of time there convincing bankers from South Africa that we knew what we were doing, that we had a good story to tell, and they all visited this business in Ghana several times. I remember the first bank that came, I think it was the Development Bank of Southern Africa.
Yeah.
They were convinced, they thought they'll fund this, but they wanted to share the risk with other banks.
Yeah.
And we went through the whole process of due diligence. And when we got to the end, they said, we can only do it if we syndicate with another bank. And that bank came on board, and they also wanted to do their own due diligence. So the whole process took very, very long.
Yeah.
But eventually we succeed. We even ran into challenges with the Reserve Bank. You know, some of you may know the South African Reserve Bank was notoriously very difficult when it came to, foreign exchange controls. So you needed to get permits from the Reserve Bank to invest money outside of the country. That whole process took us another year. So it was painful. It was very, very painful. But eventually we managed to raise this capital. We rapidly expand the business in Ghana. And by the time I left, I think we had about 10,000 customers on the network in Ghana. And we quickly became the largest internet provider there.
Wow.
So I then get an opportunity to come back to South Africa.
Yeah.
To pretty much sort of join the group holding business that was then set up here, you know.
Yeah.
And help the other opcos in DRC and Mozambique, which followed behind the Ghana operation. And that's why I came back to South Africa.
Okay.
And look, that story didn't really end well.
Yeah.
I kind of got pushed out of that business.
Yeah.
And despite all the work that I had put in, so it was quite painful. This is some of the stories that you go through as a founder, you know. Corporate politics, you know, sometimes you get pushed out of something that you could consider as your baby.
So you move on to Mavoni at that point.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a fresh new start.
So, fresh new start, wiped off everything after all the toil, the sweat, the blood.
Yeah, you're starting from scratch, lots of scars in the back, you know.
Yeah.
Of course, the experience was great. You know, the experience, you now understand how to build these businesses from nothing,
Yeah.
you know, how to operate in a very tough environment. Coming back to South Africa, a very different market altogether, you know, very high capex business, very high barriers to enter as well. So I was pretty sure that it wasn't going to be easy to start a telecom business here.
Yeah.
So we start off kind of just, you know, offering IT services to the likes of MTN, Vodacom, but there's not really, it's not immediately very clear as to how we could become a telco ourselves, how we could actually enter this space and bring connectivity, especially to underserved areas.
Yeah.
But in 2011, 2012, we get our license, our operating license here.
Yeah.
And we start looking for partnerships. And eventually, I raised some capital from a few investors. And I go and sign a deal with a company called O3B. This is one of the early low Earth orbit satellite providers. It predates your Starlink, your OneWeb. And we do a deal where we were going to pretty much buy a lot of transponder capacity and help take connectivity to more rural areas.
Okay.
That deal doesn't end well. The O3B network takes much longer to go live. It was a new tech, you know, they were building the spacecraft, the satellites from scratch. It was a very different architecture, low Earth orbit. And we lost some money there, but the good thing is we ended up with the license.
Yes.
And then we decided, what do we do next? And that's how we start looking at fiber to the home. Fiber to the home, by 2013, 2014, was still a concept. So it didn't look feasible. And we then start by working with some of the early, players, your Vumatel, your Vodacom,
Yeah.
and we get involved in the infrastructure side of this business where we actually roll out fiber to the tower.
Okay.
We also roll out a little bit of fiber to the home in some of the early suburbs that this was rolled out to. But it was to take us another 5 years before we could actually eventually become a fiber network operator ourselves.
Wow, what a journey.
Yeah. A very long journey.
Yeah.
Very long and winded.
What has kept you in the game for so long? Because, I mean, we've spent some time together and I can clearly tell, like, you're still in it, you're still grinding. How do you stay on it that long? Like, the longevity is what's amusing.
I think my early days in Ghana really taught me to really understand the importance of persevering and conviction.
Yeah.
I think once you believe in something, once you make up your mind that you're going to be a disruptor, you're going to be a trailblazer in a specific industry. Some of these industries, sometimes the timing is not quite right.
Yeah.
So it does require you to stay the course until the timing is right.
Yeah.
So I've always been convinced that fiber and high-speed connectivity would be rolled out to even the most poorest of households in Africa.
Okay.
So that conviction stayed with us. And we were always looking at different ways of doing it. How can we lower the cost? How can we drive connectivity and penetrate more areas?
Yeah.
And yeah, we're still at that journey today. We are now driving connectivity in townships.
Yes.
We're driving costs down. We're looking at innovating methods of deployment using hybrid architectures, fiber and wireless, combining these in very creative ways.
Yeah.
And it has proven, we've been proven right. Today, when you look, some of the big townships like Soweto today have fiber, have full fiber networks rolling out there. And we are driving other townships like Cosmo City, where we are one of the largest operators there. And we continue to drive connectivity. We think that we'll drive this into even more rural townships and more villages as well.
Interesting. So so for over 10,000 connections, where do you see this going? Where does it get? And you're like, okay, we've actually made a massive impact now.
I think because of my experience, West Africa, we will go back to West Africa. It's a market that I know very well. We will grow the South African market.
Yeah.
We still probably have 4 or 5 million households to cover here.
Wow.
We see ourselves as being in the forefront of really driving broadband even to the most remote areas. And we see ourselves in the next 3 or 4 years possibly being one of the top 7 or 8 networks here in South Africa.
Yes.
And becoming one of the leading Pan-African networks.
Yes.
And how to do this requires a lot of innovation. This is hard infrastructure issues. You can't really get around the fact that you need to deploy, you need to install hard infrastructure. It has to be built.
And this must be very expensive, building like infrastructure, fiber networks and all that.
Yeah.
How have you been thinking about funding? And obviously, like, if you're looking at that massive scale, are you looking to bring in capital?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are embarking in a capital raise in the coming year.
Yeah.
Thus far, we have been lucky enough to be able to fund a large chunk of the early deployments ourselves.
Okay.
But I must say that it wasn't easy. One had to really think out of the box to grow our coverage and cover more households.
Yeah.
And I think that lesson that we've learned has put us in a very good position where now we may be one of the least cost operators in the market, able to drive connectivity to even more lower income households. So the methods, the techniques, the technologies, the business models that we have developed have given us an upper hand.
Advantage.
Yeah.
This reminds me of what Elon Musk has been doing with Tesla over the years. just creating that competitive advantage that is very long term. Sounds like that's a path that you've been on. I think just talking about the effect of having very strong internet connectivity in the country definitely boosts e-commerce.
Yeah.
And now, everyone pretty much very soon is going to have connectivity in their home, even in the townships, as you're saying.
Yeah.
And that brings me to Zulzi. There's a journey around, that co-founding Zulzi with your brother and believe one more person.
Yeah.
In summary, I think it would be great just to hear some of the lessons from that journey as well, because it was a long journey. You guys were pioneers also in quick commerce, being able to deliver something in 15 minutes and, having that vision back in 2008,
so actually Zulzi starts in 2013.
2013.
Starts as a textbook, business, selling textbooks to university students.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So I spoke briefly that when I got involved with IBES, so I one of the modems that I gave it to Donald, my brother, and that's how he gets excited about being in tech, and from as early as his, 2010, 2011, he had been tinkering with what business he could start.
Yeah.
But eventually in 2013, he gets winds of a business that sells secondhand textbooks at various universities that were struggling.
Yeah.
And he decides to invest into this business. It just really needed a little bit of working capital.
Yeah.
And when he got involved, the owners wanted to get out of it, so he took it entirely over. And he finds that they actually could do this better. Instead of just selling the books during the orientation week when the university is open, he could actually set up an online presence and sell to the whole country.
Yeah.
And that's how Zulzi was born. It started as a textbook, online textbook business.
Yeah.
It scaled and sold to more than 20 universities around the country. And we were using various couriers to deliver these books. These books would be delivered within 24 to 48 hours.
Yeah.
It then pivoted from textbooks to actually selling, the African print clothing for women and men.
Yeah.
That business too ran very successfully, but when we realized that there were many other challenges around getting sizes, the correct sizes, and actually, really producing at mass, and we realized we don't have the factories locally that could actually meet the demand and the quality requirements. And eventually, Zulzi pivots to groceries and food. This is in 2016. So a long journey as well, very interesting journey.
Yeah.
Part of the story which gets really interesting is that my university co-founder of my first failed startup, Objective Logic, Mike Nechipise, becomes a co-founder in Zulzi. So he then joins my brother.
Yeah.
And Zulzi is started in 2017. So 2017, Zulzi starts delivering groceries in and around Johannesburg with a promise of delivering within 1 hour.
Yes.
At this stage, many retailers, many people in the tech space didn't really think this was a viable model.
Yeah.
It ran for some time, and we were seeing very interesting numbers out of Zulzi. Month on month, we're seeing exponential growth.
Good. Yeah.
And we knew this was going to become a norm sooner or later.
Yeah.
But we knocked at many retailers' doors, but in some cases, we were only afforded perhaps another meeting to look further into the business model. In some cases, we couldn't even get an appointment. But we carried on building Zulzi. And I think our first break with Zulzi comes probably in early 2018. I'll talk of our big break.
Yeah.
Sometimes in early 2018, we we begin to see some people downloading the app with email addresses that came from ShopRite. And naturally, we're worried. We're like, what's going on? Are they spying on us? Of course, this is the largest retailer in the continent. So it was quite fascinating to see that. It didn't take long until we actually got a call from a ShopRite executive to have a meeting.
Yes. Yeah. And so you guys, so what happens?
Yeah, we excited and we go to meet ShopRite. We think this is it's a no-brainer, There's clear synergies. We had been talking to the other retailers, including your Woolworths. We didn't make a lot of success with them. In fact, we were a great fit for someone like Woolworth, because when we were delivering, a lot of the groceries we delivered, 90% of it came from Woolworth. So we had a lot of their customers, and we thought they were going to be a great fit for a partnership. But that never really materialized. And here comes ShopRite out of nowhere, and we didn't really think ShopRite was targeting the exact same customer segment that we were playing in. But they asked for this meeting, and Donnie and Mike quickly go to Cape Town, meet with them, have a chat. And that didn't go so well initially. I think the timing was perhaps not right. They may also have had their own doubts. They were also still building e-commerce. So it was very early stage within ShopRite to look at this channel, and there were many people who still thought this was a tiny little channel that wasn't gonna, move any needle, And those meetings didn't really result in any deal, and it was quiet for a few months. And we came back and kept on grinding, just continue. And it was tough. We were always just a month or two away from sudden death. Yeah, very, very tough.
Interesting. But fast forward 2020, I think digital disruption happens and everybody needs to figure out their e-commerce.
Yeah. And so just before that, 2020, a year earlier, ShopRite eventually comes to us again and say, look, we want to look at Zulzi more closer. We want to see your business model. We want to see how this works. We're going to come to Joburg. We're going to see how all this works. We're coming with a team of, 4 people. And we used to have a small office in downtown Joburg. This was not the greatest of offices. I still remember when we got this email that they were going to come and visit us. All I was worried about was the carpet in our office and how it smelled. And I was worried about the walls and how we needed to repaint this.
Yeah.
I remember talking to Donald and saying, we got to make a plan about the walls and the carpet. And we quickly call a brother-in-law of mine who's involved with, construction and renovations. And I say to him, can you make a plan? Can you change this floor?
Before the big boy comes.
Yeah, before they come, because this was clearly going to be a deal breaker. We were a very tiny business that was really struggling from month to month, Needless to say, we even owed our landlord there at that office in Braamfontein some 10 months of rent, But fast forward, we managed to fix the floor, we fixed the painting, but now we have a problem. The smell of the paint was not going away, and this ShopRite team is coming in a few days. And now we bring in some fans to try and blow the smell off and open the windows, hoping it will dry up. But these are funny stories that founders you'll have these kind of stories, and it's important to understand you're not alone. You really are going to go through this kind of difficult moments. That whole problem, lucky for us, they postponed the meeting, by another 2 weeks. And lucky for us, the paint was able to dry. And by the time they came, it looked much nicer. We have this meeting. They see the operation. We show them all our hubs. At the time, we're operating in several hubs on the main CBDs. We had a few staff that were picking groceries and the logistic teams. And they decided they will partner with us. So 2019, we then start building 6060. Needless to say, we only had 2 engineers when we actually partnered with ShopRite. They thought we had many engineers, but we actually only had 2. They trusted in this small startup, and it took us about 9 to 12 months to build 6060. And 2020 just came along. Within, perhaps we had only gone live for 2 or 3 months.
Wow.
And it was 2020 and COVID.
Opportunity meets preparation.
Absolutely. You couldn't say that again. It was, we were just on time. We just had the right technology, the right experience, you know, and we were able to turn that opportunity and actually monetize on it. And that relationship has been great. We still support the 6060 platform. It has grown into a significant business for ShopRite. Yeah. And they have subsequently taken a small stake in Zulzi itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. That's a beautiful story. So you've done this, Mavoni, like, really done well. Zulzi really done well. And you're an investor now. This is another hat. So I think the big question I have, because you're an entrepreneur turned investor, and we have Melvin came on one of the earlier episodes, I think 2 episodes before this one, and he said, entrepreneurs make the best investors and investors make the best entrepreneurs. I really resonate with that. How do you think your entrepreneurship experience is helping you be a better investor?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Melvin. I think when you've had the scars, you know, and you've gone through the ups and downs of building from ideas to a thriving business. You've played in various, you know, subsectors. You've seen technology evolve. Yeah. You've seen it all. So it helps a lot when you now get on the other side of the table, where you are an investor. You are able to identify the opportunity and the right attitude, and you're able to share these stories with, you know, founders who are trying to disrupt different markets. And it's also a form of us really growing the ecosystem. Yes. You could almost see us as the old OGs. You know, we've been in the game for much longer. We've got a lot of this history. Yeah. And we've seen the tech scene really grow from nothing to where it is now, a really investable, you know, sector that is really growing. So it's been very, very fascinating to see the growth of VC in the continent. Yeah. When we started, both Mavoni and Zulzi, there was no VC pretty much. There was pretty much private equity that was looking for very well-established businesses with financials to back it up. Yeah. So it is, I feel that it is now the time where the early entrepreneurs can really play a much bigger role in growing the ecosystem and actually driving investment. Part of it is also investing some of our returns in the ecosystem. If you look at more established markets like Silicon Valley, they've largely been driven by early founders, you know, that have made some good exits. Coming back and building more startups, more technology startups. So that's pretty much what we are doing, and this forms part of that, you know, being involved in community initiatives, talking about both the successes and the failures and the stories, the lessons learned around this. Yeah,
we need to talk about that more for sure. So as we wrap up, I'd love for you to give a parting shot. As an investor, what do you look for in founders so that founders are just more prepared? Because this many founders claim that capital is one of the biggest challenges they have. Yeah. So what are you looking for? What are sectors that you think are going to see massive growth for the next decade?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's very important for founders to have that hunger, you know. So you've got to have the hunger to succeed, the hunger to really build something worthwhile. Yeah. it's such a long and laborious and very often a very lonely journey that you are going to need behind you internally some mechanism to keep you energized and keep you motivated. In some cases, you're going against the tide. A lot of people will say no to you, so you really got to be able to build that grit. And you'll hear many successful founders talk repeatedly about this. So we look for highly motivated individuals. We also look for people who are really solving real problems. I think sometimes we're finding that in the market, because of the excitement of being a founder, it is often easy for people who like the idea of being a founder or an entrepreneur, but aren't really willing to endure the pain that it actually will bring. So we look we do look past the excitement. We want to see something more, than just the excitement. Needless to say, you have to put your skin in the game, And I think as an advice to some of our founders, upcoming founders, is try and put the little that you have in your business. You got to be the first investor. You got to risk some of your own money in the business. That goes a long way towards convincing fellow investors to put money. I think if you do that, if you really solve hard problems, and you are, and one other key part is just timing. So sometimes we don't think a lot about timing. So you got to be cautious around timing. Sometimes you are solving a problem, but you may be too early or too late. So it does require you to be quite flexible. While the vision should remain, you must be very flexible in how you're going to implement it. Because the journey is quite complicated. But we think this is the right time. We're seeing exciting startups in e-commerce, in fintech, in health tech. I think we are also going to start seeing, many startups, working in the area of AI, and actually bringing technology to help in agriculture, in other sectors, that will really grow the economy in Africa.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for your time, for making time to share that story with us. A story of grit, a story of resilience. No one could have put it better about what it actually takes to build a successful venture in this continent. Guys, that's the end of this episode. It was very informative, especially for tech entrepreneurs, software engineers looking to go into entrepreneurship and what it takes. And also people looking to scale across the continent. So don't forget to subscribe so that we notify you as more episodes drop. We're still covering the South Africa region and seeing the amazing businesses that are being built here, but for the world. So, and also follow us across all the social platforms so that you can get these nuggets of wisdom from OGs. We drop them every other week. And have a good week. I hope the wisdom you've gotten today will be super applicable to your business. Cheers.
We got it next.